My name is Gracie Knight. At 29 years old, I am a sergeant in the United States Army. I have survived the dust storms of Afghanistan, but I nearly died on the hardwood floor of my own suburban Ohio home. I can still remember the weight of my stepbrother Brian's leather belt as he cinched it around my throat, lifting me off the ground. His eyes were bloodshot, his teeth clenched. Spit flew onto my cheek as he screamed, "Die quietly, Gracie. Do the world a favor." My pulse hammered against the leather, a frantic bird trying to escape a cage. My throat was on fire. I couldn't cough. I couldn't cry. All I could feel was the pressure, the heat, and the terrifying silence inside my own body. Brian stopped yelling. He was growling now, like an animal, pouring every ounce of his hatred into the strength of his hands. My knees buckled first, then the rest of my body followed, collapsing like a wet rag. I fell hard, and I knew that, to them, I'd been dead for a long, long time. He thought he was extinguishing my life. He had no idea he had just activated my final weapon. If you've ever been treated like an outsider by your own family, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button, because this story is proof that the truth always finds a way to speak, even when you're forced to be silent. The world narrowed to a pinprick of light, a blurry tunnel edged with exploding stars. My lungs were screaming, two empty bags being twisted shut. The roaring in my ears was the sound of my own blood trying to find a way out. But through that tunnel, my vision locked onto a single, stationary point. A shadow in the doorway of the living room. It was Mary. She stood perfectly still, her hands clasped together at her waist, fingers laced so tightly her knuckles were white. She wasn't moving forward to help. She wasn't running to call the police. She was just watching. An observer at a gruesome play she had seen rehearsed 1,000 times. In the last desperate seconds of my consciousness, I tried to make a sound, a gurgle, anything to break her trance. But the only sound in the room, besides Brian's guttural rage, was a whisper that cut through my panic with the chilling precision of ice. It was Mara's voice, not directed at Brian, but at the empty space around her, as if she were reassuring herself. "It'll be fine," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the thunder in my head. "Brian's just angry. He'll stop in a minute." She was witnessing an attempted murder, and her brain was calmly translating it into a temper tantrum. The words didn't register as denial. They registered as a verdict, a conscious choice. She was choosing the illusion of peace, the safety of the aggressor, over the life of her stepdaughter. The physical pain in my throat was nothing compared to the new psychological agony that bloomed in my chest. He was killing my body, but she had been killing my spirit for years. My training kicked in, a final instinctual spasm from a part of my brain that refused to surrender. My right hand, limp at my side, slammed flat against the polished oak floor. Slap, slap, slap. 3 hard, distinct impacts. Code, black. The signal you give when you can't speak, when you're compromised, when you need immediate extraction from a hostile zone. It wasn't just a plea for help. It was a final test. A last, desperate question aimed directly at the woman in the doorway. "Do you see me? Do you see what's happening?" Her silhouette shifted. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought she'd understood. But then I saw her face scrunch into a frown. Not of horror, but of irritation. As if the rhythmic slapping was an annoying noise disturbing her evening. She didn't see a distress signal. She saw a nuisance. And in that simple, dismissive expression, she confirmed everything I already knew. I was utterly and completely alone. The betrayal was so absolute, it was almost clarifying. As the blackness crept in from the edges of my vision, my mind, strangely, became calm. It detached from the burning agony in my throat and traveled backward, not randomly, but with a specific destination. It was searching for an answer to the silent question now screaming through my soul. Why is she letting this happen? The memory surfaced instantly. I was 15 again, standing in this very living room just a few months after my father, Captain Robert Knight, had been killed in action. Mara was carefully taking his photos off the mantelpiece, the one of him in his dress blues, his smile so confident, the one of him holding me on his shoulders, both of us laughing. She placed them face down in a cardboard box with surgical gentleness. "It's just to help Brian," she had explained, not looking at me. "It's hard for him seeing your dad everywhere. He feels like he can't compete." Even then, I knew it was a lie. It wasn't about Brian's feelings. It was about power. It was the first strategic move in a long, quiet campaign to erase my father's legacy from this house. By removing his image, she was removing his authority, his memory, his honor. And with him gone, she was erasing my place in the family. She wasn't just enabling Brian's jealousy. She was actively clearing the field for his tyranny to take root and grow, unchecked. The empty spaces on the mantelpiece were where my status in this family had died, long before Brian's belt ever found my throat. The memory dissolved, and the present rushed back in a final, crushing wave. The darkness was almost complete. My last coherent thought wasn't of fear, or of my father, or of the life I was losing. It was a cold, clear, tactical inventory. The micro camera tucked into the smoke detector, the audio recorder taped beneath the coffee table, the USB flash drive, loaded with every file, every recording, every piece of evidence I had gathered over the last 10 days, hidden securely under a loose floorboard in the hall closet. I had prepared for this war. I had gathered the intelligence, set up the surveillance, and secured the asset. I had done it all because I knew, deep in my soldier's gut, that Mara would never protect me. She was part of the hostile force. My silent vow wasn't a plea for my life anymore. It was a promise of what was to come. It wasn't just aimed at Brian anymore, the blunt instrument of their hatred. It was aimed at the entire rotten, toxic system Mara had built and maintained with her silence. As the last flicker of light went out, the words echoed in the ruins of my mind, a promise forged in fire and betrayal. I'm not done. The question hung in the darkness that swallowed me. Why? Why would Mara just stand there? As the world faded, my mind, free from the constraints of my dying body, reeled backward, not to find comfort, but to find an answer. It sifted through years of memories, looking for the origin point, the moment the first crack appeared in the foundation of our family. And it found it. I am 15. The air in our house is thick with the scent of lilies and the suffocating weight of grief. It's been 3 weeks since my father's funeral. 3 weeks since I watched them hand Mara the folded flag that was the last thing to ever touch his casket. That evening, she found me in the garage, staring at the half-finished F-16 model on the workbench. It was the last project Dad and I had started together. She wrapped her arms around my shoulders from behind, her hug surprisingly tight. "I will always love you as my own, Gracie," she whispered into my hair. Always. And in that moment, I believed her. I held on to that promise like a lifeline. A few weeks later, I came home from school to find Brian in the garage. The F-16 was in pieces on the concrete floor, its delicate wings snapped, the cockpit shattered. He'd smashed it with a hammer. When I confronted him, his face was a mask of smug defiance. I ran inside, tears streaming down my face, holding the broken fuselage. I found Mara in the kitchen. Before I could even speak, she saw the wreckage in my hands, looked past me to where Brian was now standing, and her expression softened with a pity that wasn't for me. She turned back to me, her voice gentle but firm. "You can build another one, can't you, honey? Brian is having such a hard time, losing a father figure. Just let him have this one. Just be the bigger person." It was the first time. The first time her love came with a price tag. And the price was a piece of my heart. The promise she made in the shadow of my father's death had an expiration date, and it had just passed. I was the bigger person. I always was. I cleaned up the pieces of the plane, and with them, the pieces of that promise, and threw them both in the trash. 2 years later, I was 17. I sat Mara down at that same kitchen table and told her my decision. I was enlisting in the Army. I needed her signature, as I was still a minor. It wasn't just a career choice, it was an escape plan. A way to follow in my dad's footsteps and get away from the house that was suffocating me. She was hesitant, but she saw the ironclad determination in my eyes. Brian overheard from the living room. He stormed in, his face purple with rage. You think you're better than us, going off to play soldier like him? He shoved me, hard. I stumbled backward over a kitchen chair, my arm twisting at an unnatural angle as I hit the floor. A sickening crack echoed in the room. The pain was white-hot, immediate, but the most painful thing was Mara's reaction. She rushed to Brian's side first, putting a calming hand on his arm, whispering, "It's okay, it's okay," before she even looked at me. On the drive to the emergency room, I sat in the passenger seat, cradling my broken wrist, tears of pain and humiliation silently tracking down my face. Mara didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask what happened. She just stared straight ahead at the road and said, her voice dripping with disappointment, "You see, Gracie? I told you not to antagonize him. Now you've gone and made everything so much worse." The doctor put a cast on my arm. But Mara put a cast on my soul. The message was clear. My pain was an inconvenience. My injury was my fault. I was the one who had to manage his anger, absorb his violence, and bear the consequences in silence. The pattern was set. My role was to sacrifice. His was to take. Hers was to justify it. After basic training, I came home on my first leave, walking taller than I ever had in my life. I was a soldier. I had earned my place in the world. I felt so proud when I cashed my first real paycheck. I went to the bank, withdrew almost all of it in crisp $20 bills, and presented it to Mara. "To help out with the bills," I said, beaming. She took the cash, her lips curling into a knowing little smile. She didn't say thank you. She fanned the bills out, and in a voice loud enough for Brian, who was slouched on the couch, to hear, she announced, "Well, look at this. She knows her place. At least she contributes to the roof over her head." Brian just smirked from the sofa, not even looking up from his phone. In one sentence, my gesture of pride and love was twisted into a transaction. A payment. I wasn't a daughter helping her family. I was a tenant paying rent. The uniform on my back suddenly felt like a costume, my pride a childish fantasy. Over the years, Mara perfected her weapon. It wasn't a fist or a belt. It was a phrase, a mantra she repeated so often it became a curse. "Have some compassion for him, Gracie." That phrase excused everything. When I found out Brian had taken money from my wallet, the answer was, "He's just struggling, Gracie. Have some compassion." When he brought his friends over and publicly humiliated my high school boyfriend during a Super Bowl party, making him leave in tears, it was, "He's just being a protective older brother. Have some compassion." The curse created a warped reality where his cruelty was always reframed as a symptom of his own pain, and my attempts to defend myself were selfish. My boundaries were insubordination. My feelings were an attack on his fragility. I was taught that being a good daughter, a good sister, meant being a punching bag, both emotionally and, as I would learn, physically. It meant absorbing everything and expecting nothing. If you've ever had to listen to endless excuses made for someone who was hurting you, hit that like button to show some support. And if you know what it's like to be the bigger person until you feel like you're about to break, just type the word excuses in the comments below. Let's see how many of us there are. I learned my lessons well. I became an expert at being quiet, at making myself small, at swallowing my own pain to make room for his. But you can only compress a spring for so long before it snaps. Looking back now, I have to ask myself, when does being a good person stop and self-destruction begin? The question I asked myself in the blackness, when does being a good person stop and self-destruction begin, was answered the moment I stepped out of the taxi. I had a 10-day leave, a brief window of peace carved out from a life of discipline and duty. I had been dreaming of my own bed, the quiet sanctuary of the room I grew up in. I dragged my heavy duffel bag up the driveway, the familiar scent of Ohio's damp earth filling my lungs. But the moment I opened the front door, the peace I was hoping for shattered. The house smelled different. It was stale, laced with the sour odor of old sweat and something vaguely chemical, like cheap protein powder. Mara met me in the hall with a brief, distracted hug. "Gracie, you're here." It wasn't a welcome, it was a statement of fact. It's good to be home, I said, trying to force a smile. I started heading for the stairs. I'm just going to drop my bag in my room. Mara's hand on my arm stopped me. Oh, honey, she said, her voice laced with that familiar, placating tone. About that, we had to make a few changes. My old room, the one with the window that overlooked the oak tree in the backyard, was no longer mine. The door was open and I could see inside. It was unrecognizable. Brian's weight bench was pushed against one wall, dumbbells scattered on the floor. Piles of his laundry overflowed from a hamper, and a set of hockey pads, reeking of sweat, was slung over my desk chair. It wasn't a bedroom anymore. It was his personal locker room. Your room was just sitting empty, and Brian needed the space for his things, Mara explained, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. It seemed like such a waste. You can use the pull-out sofa in the basement. We put fresh sheets on it. The basement. The cold, perpetually damp space with a single, high window that let in slivers of gray light. That was where I belonged now. I looked from the wreckage of my childhood room to Mara's carefully neutral face. The message was as clear as a direct order. You are not a resident here. You are a guest, and you are not welcome. The temporary arrangement, I soon learned, had been in place for 2 years. My 10-day leave became a tour of duty in a new kind of war zone, one fought with passive aggression and psychological torment. The battles were small, almost invisible to an outsider, but each one was a calculated strike. On the second day, I came upstairs to find my freshly pressed Army service uniform, which I had hung carefully on the back of a door, lying in a heap on the floor with a dark, wet stain spreading across the jacket. Oh, for goodness sake, Brian said, walking past with a coffee mug. Clumsy me. Guess I spilled. He didn't sound sorry. He sounded satisfied. The nights were the worst. He would blast heavy metal from his room, my old room, until 2 a.m, the bass vibrating through the floorboards into my makeshift bed in the basement. It was a classic sleep deprivation tactic designed to wear me down, to make me irritable and exhausted. Then came the violation of my gear. As a soldier, your duffel bag is your life. It's organized, it's personal, it's sacred. One afternoon, I came back to find it unzipped, its contents clearly rummaged through. A small ceremonial knife my father had given me was missing, along with a few other personal items. I confronted Mara in the kitchen, my voice tight with a rage I was struggling to contain. He went through my things, Mara. He's stealing from me. She sighed that long, weary sigh she always used when she was about to dismiss my feelings. She didn't even look up from chopping vegetables. Gracie, you're an adult now. Don't be so dramatic over little things. You're a soldier. Why are you letting this get to you? I thought they taught you to be tougher than this. She did it again. She took the very identity I was proud of and used it as a weapon against me. My training, my discipline, my strength. She twisted it all into a reason why I shouldn't have feelings, why I shouldn't be allowed to complain. My resilience was reframed as a weakness for being too sensitive. The breaking point, the moment the war went from cold to hot, came on the 7th night. I was in the basement, trying to read under the dim light of a single bulb, when I heard Brian's voice drifting down from the kitchen. He was on the phone. His voice was low, but the floorboards carried the sound. I crept to the bottom of the stairs, my heart starting to pound, and listened. Nah, man, I can't come out tonight, he was saying. I could hear the smirk in his voice. The bitch is back in town. A pause, then a cynical laugh. Yeah, Sergeant Gracie. She's home, strutting around in her little uniform like she owns the damn place, like she's still Daddy's little princess. My blood ran cold. He wasn't just annoyed with me. He despised me. She doesn't get it, he continued, his voice dropping into a venomous growl. This is my house now. Dad's gone. She's just a guest who's overstayed her welcome. I need to make sure she understands who's in charge here. For good. That was it. That was the confirmation. This wasn't a sibling rivalry. This wasn't a petty squabble over a bedroom. This was a campaign. A calculated, deliberate war for dominance. And in his eyes, I was the enemy combatant that needed to be neutralized. His words confirmed every fear that had been festering inside me. He didn't just want me to be uncomfortable. He wanted me gone. That night, sleep was impossible. I sat on the edge of the lumpy sofa bed in the suffocating darkness of the basement. The only sound was the frantic, rhythmic drumming of my own heart against my ribs. I closed my eyes and saw a map, a battlefield layout. This house was no longer a home, it was a hostile environment, and my training had taught me exactly how to operate in a hostile environment. You don't wait for mercy from the enemy, you don't appeal to their better nature, you gather intelligence, you document everything. You prepare your defenses. My resolve hardened, turning from hurt and frustration into something cold, sharp, and clear. A decision. I was no longer a daughter on leave. I was a soldier on a mission. I quietly slid off the sofa and moved to the corner where my duffel bag was propped against the damp wall. My fingers found the zipper, and the sound it made as I pulled it open was the only sound in the silence. It was the sound of a new war beginning. The decision I made in the basement wasn't born of anger, but of cold, hard clarity. My mission had begun. But before I could implement any strategy, I needed to get my head straight. The next day, after another tense, near-silent breakfast, the inevitable clash happened. Brian cornered me as I was heading for the basement stairs. "Still slumming it down there, Sergeant?" he sneered, blocking my path. "Don't you get tired of living in a hole?" I just looked at him, my face a blank mask. "It's quiet." "Yeah, well, don't get too comfortable," he said, stepping closer, his voice dropping. "This isn't your house. You're just a charity case." He then shoved my shoulder as he walked past, a deliberate act of physical dominance. The push sent me stumbling back a step. It wasn't hard enough to make me fall, but it was hard enough to leave a mark, both on my skin and on my resolve. I didn't retaliate. I didn't say a word. I just turned and walked out the back door into the humid Ohio afternoon, the screen door slapping shut behind me. I needed air. I needed a space that he hadn't contaminated. I stood in the middle of our small, patchy lawn, just breathing. The familiar sounds of the neighborhood, a distant lawnmower, the cheerful barking of a dog, kids laughing down the street, felt like they were from another planet. My world had shrunk to the 4 toxic walls of that house. Afternoon. The voice, gravelly and calm, startled me. I turned to see our next-door neighbor, Jared, standing on the other side of the low wooden fence that separated our properties. He was a widower, had been for years, and had lived in that house since I was a little girl. A pair of hedge clippers rested in his weathered hands. He was a quiet man, someone who mostly kept to himself. In all the years we'd been neighbors, our interactions had been limited to polite waves and brief comments about the weather. I expected the same now. A nod, a simple, "Hello." Instead, his gaze was direct, and it wasn't focused on my face. It was fixed on my upper arm, where Brian's shove had left the faint, blooming shadow of a bruise against my skin. He didn't mention it directly. He didn't have to. He just looked from the bruise up to my eyes. And I saw something in his expression that I hadn't seen in this house for over a decade. Genuine concern. "Things still rough over there, Sergeant?" he asked, his voice low. The word hung in the air between us. Sergeant. He called me by my rank. He wasn't dismissing me, wasn't using it to call me weak. He was acknowledging me, respecting me. In 2 syllables, this practical stranger had given me more validation than my own family had in my entire life. I felt a lump form in my throat, and for a second, I couldn't speak. I just nodded. "It's been a tough leave," I managed to say. He nodded slowly, as if he understood everything I wasn't saying. "Your dad, Captain Knight, he was a good man," Jared said, changing the subject just enough to put me at ease. "He and I used to solve the world's problems right over this fence after mowing the lawn. Shared a few beers." He paused, a faint smile touching his lips. "He was damn proud of you. Talked about you enlisting all the time." Hearing that, a fresh wave of grief and love for my father washed over me. It was a simple memory, but it was real. It was a piece of my history that hadn't been erased or twisted. Jared leaned against the fence, his voice dropping even lower. "Look, Gracie, I'm not one to meddle in other folks' business, but I've been living here a long time. My hearing isn't what it used to be, but I know the difference between a family squabble and the sound of a bully. There it was. The confirmation. The single validating sentence from an outsider that told me I wasn't crazy. I wasn't being too sensitive. What was happening was real, and someone else could see it. I felt my shoulders, which had been tense for days, relax just a fraction. "Come on over," he said, gesturing with his head toward his patio. "Let me get you a glass of lemonade." I hesitated for only a moment before walking around the fence and into his yard. It felt like crossing into a safe zone. We sat on his weathered patio chairs, and he handed me a tall, cold glass. The sweetness of the lemonade was a stark contrast to the bitterness that had filled my days. We sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Jared pointed with his chin toward a small discreet security camera mounted under the eave of his roof. It was aimed toward his back porch, but its wide-angle lens clearly covered my entire backyard as well. "Put that up last year," he said casually. "Had some kids stealing packages off porches in the neighborhood. It records everything, 24/7, covers your whole backyard, too." He took a sip of his own drink, then looked me straight in the eye. "Sometimes an impartial record is the best thing to have." He didn't elaborate, he didn't offer advice or tell me what to do. He just gave me the information. He armed me with a piece of intelligence that was more valuable than any weapon. For the first time since I'd come home, I didn't feel completely outflanked. I had a piece of high ground. I had an ally providing overwatch. When I stood up to leave, I tried to find the words to thank him, but they felt inadequate. "Jared, He held up a hand, stopping me. He stood up, and I saw the faded outline of a globe and anchor tattoo on his forearm, the emblem of the U.S. Marine Corps. He looked at me, not as a neighbor's kid, but as a fellow service member. "Listen to me, Sergeant," he said, his voice firm but kind. "Marines and the Army might give each other hell all the time, but we never, ever leave a soldier behind. You understand me?" I nodded, the lump returning to my throat. "If you need anything, anything at all, you don't hesitate. You've got someone watching your six." I walked back to my house, the promise from a man who barely knew me echoing in my mind. It was a promise built on a code of honor, and it had more weight, more truth, than 1,000 empty promises from the woman who was supposed to be my mother. I descended the stairs back into the cold basement, but this time, I didn't feel alone. My mission was the same, but the battlefield had changed. I now had an ally, and I had a plan. Jared's promise was a shield, but a shield doesn't win a war. It only keeps you alive long enough to fight back. His words gave me the moral support I desperately needed, but I knew that in the end, my safety was my own responsibility. The next evening, that responsibility was put to the test. It started over nothing. A disagreement about what to watch on TV. Brian wanted to watch a hockey game. I wanted to watch the evening news. It was a stupid, trivial conflict, but with him, anything could become a flashpoint. His frustration quickly escalated into rage. "It's always about you, isn't it?" he roared, snatching the remote from my hand. He stood up, towering over me where I sat on the couch. In a fit of theatrical anger, he hurled the heavy glass coffee mug he was holding, not at me, but at the wall just beside my head. It shattered on impact, sending a spray of hot coffee and sharp ceramic shrapnel across the room. A small stinging shard grazed my cheek, drawing a single drop of blood. The explosion of violence was so sudden, so disproportionate, that I could only stare at him, stunned. Then, the shock gave way to a cold, familiar fury. "You're insane!" I yelled, jumping to my feet. "This is just like the time you broke my wrist." Brian let out a short, ugly laugh. A smirk spread across his face. "You're making stuff up again, Gracie. You fell. You were always a clumsy kid." I stared at him, my mouth agape, unable to process the blatant denial of a recorded medical fact. But the true horror came a second later. Mara, who had been drawn into the room by the sound of the crash, calmly stepped between us. She looked at me, her face a mask of disappointment. "That's right, I remember," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "She was always so clumsy, that one, tripping over her own feet. Don't blame your brother for your own carelessness, Gracie." It was a pincer movement, a coordinated psychological assault. They stood there, side by side, rewriting history in real time, painting me as a delusional, clumsy liar. It was the most brutal form of manipulation, gaslighting, designed to make me question my own sanity, my own memories. In that moment, staring at their united front, I felt a profound and terrifying clarity. I couldn't reason with people who rejected reality. I couldn't argue with liars who believed their own fabrications. I could only record them. That night, the damp, cold basement became my tactical operations center. My mission was clear: document the truth. I unzipped my duffel bag and laid out my equipment on the concrete floor. It wasn't much, but it was enough. A spare burner smartphone, a micro recorder no bigger than my thumb that I'd ordered online, a small battery-powered nanny cam. This house was no longer a home. It was a designated area of operations. My family were no longer family. They were subjects of surveillance. I spent the next hour planning my operation with the same methodical focus I would use for a field mission. The target was Brian. His patterns of behavior were the intelligence I needed. Mara was a secondary target, an enabler whose complicity needed to be documented. I identified strategic locations for my devices, places where conflict was most likely to erupt. The first device was the micro recorder. The next morning, before anyone else was awake, I slipped upstairs and secured it with a piece of duct tape to the underside of the dining room table. It was a high-traffic area, a place where they often talked when they thought no one was listening. The payoff was immediate and more chilling than I could have imagined. That evening, I retrieved the device and huddled in the basement, listening to the recording through my earbuds. The audio was clear. It captured the clinking of forks and knives, then Brian's voice, thick with annoyance. "I can't wait until she's gone," he whined. "It's like having a ghost in the house, a ghost that thinks it pays the mortgage." Then Mara's voice, low and conspiratorial. "Just be patient, honey. A few more days. It'll be over soon." A pause. "I spoke with the lawyer again last week, just to be sure. Robert's will, it's all taken care of. Everything goes to you. She won't get a dime." A cold dread, sharp and suffocating, washed over me. I had to play it back twice to believe it. This wasn't just about resentment or jealousy anymore. This was a calculated, long-term conspiracy. This was about money. My father's legacy. They weren't just trying to push me out of the house. They were trying to erase me from our family's history entirely, cutting me off from the last thing my father had left for me. This new information changed the threat level. This wasn't just a domestic dispute. I was a soldier in a potentially dangerous situation, and I had a duty to report it. I opened my laptop and composed a new, encrypted email. The recipient was my commanding officer, Colonel Ford. My fingers flew across the keyboard, my language precise and professional, stripped of all emotion. Subject: Request to log official report. SGT Neitzer. Requesting to officially log a report regarding an unstable domestic situation encountered during my current leave period. The situation involves escalating hostility, which may pose a direct threat to my personal safety. I am taking measures to ensure my own security. Will keep you apprised of any developments. Very respectfully, Sergeant Gracie Knight. I hit send, my heart pounding. The response came in less than 5 minutes, a testament to the efficiency and concern of a good leader. Subject: Request to log official report. SGT Night message. Received and understood, Sergeant. Report has been officially logged. Your safety is the priority. Follow your training. We have your back. Stay safe. Ford. I closed the laptop, a wave of profound relief washing over me. The words, "We have your back," were a lifeline. I wasn't just a daughter fighting a lonely battle in a basement anymore. I was Sergeant Knight, an American soldier. And the United States Army knew I was in a war zone. I wasn't fighting alone. With my resolve solidified, I took the final piece of equipment from my bag, the small battery-powered camera. There was one more strategic location that needed surveillance: the living room, the very heart of the house. I knew, with a soldier's certainty, that the final battle would be fought there. And I would be ready for it. The final night of my leave felt heavy, thick with an unspoken tension that permeated every corner of the house. I spent the evening in the basement, meticulously preparing my uniform for my departure the next morning. Laying out the deep blue Army service uniform jacket was a ritual, a way of reconnecting with the person I was outside of these walls, Sergeant Knight. I polished the brass buttons until they gleamed and carefully pinned my father's medals, his bronze star, his purple heart, next to my own. This uniform wasn't just a set of clothes, it was a legacy. It was my father's honor and my own, woven together. I carried it upstairs to the living room to hang it, ensuring it wouldn't get wrinkled. As I smoothed the lapels, the door swung open, and Brian stumbled in. He reeked of stale beer and cheap whiskey, his eyes bloodshot and unfocused. He stopped when he saw me, a slow, malicious grin spreading across his face. Well, 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 he slurred, his voice a low growl. Look what we have here. Playing dress up? He lurched forward. Before I could react, he snatched the uniform jacket from my hands. The scent of alcohol washed over me, acrid and suffocating. You and this stupid clown suit, he spat, his words thick with years of resentment. Always pretending you're so much better than everyone else. And then he did it. He threw the jacket onto the hardwood floor. The metals clattered against the wood with a sound that seemed to echo in the silent room. Then, deliberately, he ground the heel of his heavy work boot onto the purple heart, scraping it against the floor. A fire I didn't know I possessed erupted in my veins, burning away all fear, all hesitation, all pain. There was only ice-cold rage. I looked at him, my voice devoid of any emotion. It was a flat, lethal command. Pick it up. He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. What? You gonna cry to mommy? He taunted, taking a step toward me. You gonna tell her how the big bad brother was mean to you? I didn't flinch. I stood my ground, my posture as rigid as if I were at attention. I held his gaze and spoke with the chilling calm of a soldier who knew the battle had finally arrived. Or the whole world will hear you in this recording. I slowly raised my burner phone, which had been recording audio from my pocket since he walked in. The screen was lit, the red recording icon a pulsing beacon in the dim light. I watched his face cycle through a storm of emotions. First, drunken confusion. Then, dawning comprehension. It was followed by a flash of pure animal panic in his eyes. And finally, as he realized he was cornered, the panic morphed into something else, something terrifying. A mask of pure, unadulterated malice. The last shred of humanity vanished from his face, replaced by the primitive rage of a predator. You bitch! He hissed, the words barely a whisper. And then he lunged. It was the same attack from my nightmares, from the opening moments of this story, but now I was living it with the full weight of context. He didn't go for me with his fists. He fumbled at his waist, his thick fingers unbuckling his belt. The sound of the leather pulling free from the loops was sickeningly loud. He swung it, and I threw my arms up to defend myself, but he was stronger, faster. He brought it around my neck, pulling it tight. My training screamed at me to fight back, gouge the eyes, strike the throat, but his body weight was already crushing me, driving the air from my lungs. He was lifting me off the floor, the rough leather biting into my skin, the metal buckle digging into my throat. My vision started to tunnel. Black spots danced at the edges. I could feel the frantic, useless hammering of my own heart against my ribs. I clawed at the belt, my fingernails scraping against the leather, finding no purchase. And through the roaring in my ears, I heard his voice. A guttural snarl right next to my ear, his spit hitting my cheek. Die in silence, Gracie. Do the world a favor. The words of my introduction. But this time, they were not just a memory, they were my reality. My executioner's final curse. My body was failing. My lungs burned for air that wouldn't come. But my mind, my soldier's mind, was still working. Follow your training. Complete the mission. My hand, trembling and weak, fumbled for the phone on the floor where I dropped it. My fingers brushed against the smooth glass. I couldn't see it. I could only feel. I slid my thumb across the screen, searching for the emergency alert icon I had programmed. A triple tap. That's all it would take. A silent code black signal sent to the two numbers that could save me, 911 and Jared. My thumb felt clumsy, disconnected from my brain. Tap, tap. I was losing consciousness, the world dissolving into a suffocating gray fog. My body went limp. Just one more. And then, a sound shattered the deadly silence. Boom, boom, boom. It was the sound of a fist hammering on the front door, a percussive explosion that shook the entire house. Gracie, what's going on in there? I've called the police. Jared. His voice was a cannon blast, a roar of righteous fury that cut through my fading consciousness. The sound shocked Brian. I felt the pressure around my neck loosen for a fraction of a second as his head snapped toward the door. Just a split second of hesitation. It was enough. If you believe that good people stepping in can change the world, hit that like button. And if you think Jared is a true hero for having his friends back, type hero in the comments to show your support for this brave veteran. That single moment of distraction saved my life. The belt went slack, and I fell from his grasp, collapsing onto the hardwood floor like a puppet with its strings cut. I landed hard, the impact jarring my bones. I couldn't breathe. I could only gasp, my throat raw and burning, my lungs desperately trying to pull in the precious, life-giving air. The battle had just reached its terrifying peak, and the cavalry had just arrived. The world came back to me in fragments of sound and color. The splintering crash of the front door being forced open. Shouts. The heavy thud of boots on the hardwood floor. Flashing red and blue lights painted the walls in chaotic strobing patterns. I was still on the floor, curled in on myself, my throat a column of fire, each ragged gasp for air a fresh wave of agony. A woman's voice, sharp and authoritative, cut through the noise. Police! Nobody move. I saw a pair of black boots, then a woman in a dark blue uniform kneeling beside me. Her name tag read, Chin. She had a calm, no-nonsense face. Ma'am, can you hear me? Paramedics are right behind us. Before I could answer, Brian started his performance. He pointed a trembling finger at me, his face a mask of faux terror. She attacked me. She went crazy. It's her PTSD from the army. She just snapped. But Officer Chin's eyes were not on him. They were on me. They scanned the scene with a professional, practiced gaze that missed nothing. The angry, raw ligature marks blooming on my neck. The heavy leather belt lying on the floor beside me. My phone, its screen still glowing with the active recording icon. And then her eyes flickered to the corner of the room, to the figure standing half hidden in the shadows of the kitchen doorway. Tamara. My stepmother wasn't crying. She wasn't hysterical. She wasn't rushing to my side or to her son's. She was just standing there. Frozen. Her face was a blank, emotionless void. In that single, chilling glance, Officer Chin saw what I had known for years. This wasn't a simple case of a soldier having a breakdown. This was a crime scene. Turn around and put your hands behind your back, she said to Brian, her voice flat and cold. His blustering protest died in his throat as another officer cuffed him, reading him his Miranda rights in a bored monotone. Then the paramedics were there, a whirlwind of calm, efficient motion. They surrounded me, their voices a soothing murmur of questions I couldn't answer. They cut my shirt open, stuck pads to my chest, and fitted an oxygen mask over my face. I heard one of them say my pulse was thready, my blood pressure was bottoming out. And then, as they lifted me onto a stretcher, the world began to fade again, the edges going dark, the sounds becoming distant and distorted. The last thing I remember from the house was being wheeled past Mara. She still hadn't moved. She just stared at me with those empty eyes as they carried me out of the home she had helped turn into a torture chamber. The rest comes back in flashes, like scenes from a movie I can't quite follow. The wail of the siren, the bright lights of the emergency room. And then, a moment of terrifying silence. I was floating in a peaceful, painless void, and then a violent jolt, like being struck by lightning, slammed me back into my body. We've got VFib, charging to 200, clear. Another jolt. My body arched off the gurney. Still no rhythm, asystole, pushing EPI, charge again to 360, clear. A third brutal shock. A high-pitched, steady beep from a machine next to me finally broke into a weak, faltering rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. The sound of life. I would learn later that my heart had stopped. For 12 seconds, I was clinically dead. 12 seconds of silence, a chilling echo of my attacker's final command. That number would be seared into my memory, a permanent testament to his hatred. When I finally regained a semblance of consciousness, the world was a blur of white sheets and the antiseptic smell of the hospital. Officer Chin was standing by my bedside. My throat was too raw to speak properly, but my mind was working. The mission wasn't over. Trust your training, secure the objective. I reached out a trembling hand and tugged on her sleeve. I forced the words out, my voice a dry, rasping whisper. Floorboard, USB. She leaned in closer, her brow furrowed in concentration. What was that, Sergeant? Loose floorboard, I rasped. By the fireplace. USB drive. A flicker of understanding crossed her face. Just then, Jared appeared at the doorway, his face etched with worry. Officer Chin turned to him. Do you know anything about a loose floorboard by the fireplace? Jared nodded immediately. Yes, ma'am. I helped her dad fix it years ago. I can show you exactly where it is. Officer Chin gave me a single, decisive nod, a silent promise. She left, and I knew, with every fiber of my being, that my plan had worked. My body had been broken, but my secret weapon, the cold, hard, undeniable truth I had so carefully collected, was now in safe hands. A few hours later, another woman in uniform appeared. She was a young Army lieutenant. Her name tag read Maddox. She was a liaison officer, sent from my base. She had a kind professional demeanor that immediately put me at ease. Sergeant Knight, she said softly, Colonel Ford is on the line for you. She held a phone to my ear. I heard the familiar, calm, commanding voice of my CO. Sergeant, he said, and the sound of his voice, a link to my real life, my real identity, was so grounding it brought tears to my eyes. I've been briefed on the situation. You've completed the hardest part of your mission. Now you let us take it from here. I listened, tears silently streaming down my face into the hospital pillow. The Army's Family Advocacy Program has been notified, he continued, his voice a rock of stability. The FBT protocol has been initiated. You will have full legal and psychological support. You are protected, Sergeant. We have your back. I couldn't speak. I could only cry. They weren't tears of pain, or fear, or anger. They were tears of pure, unadulterated relief. The war I had been fighting alone for so long was finally over. The professionals had taken charge. My evidence was safe. The system was working. I had survived. The day of the trial, I didn't choose my clothes. My uniform chose me. Months had passed, months of physical therapy for my throat and psychological counseling arranged by the Army. Months of preparing, of steeling myself for this final battle. When I walked through the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom, the silence that fell was a physical thing. I wasn't wearing a victim's somber suit. I was wearing my Army service uniform, the deep blue jacket perfectly pressed, the brass buttons gleaming under the fluorescent lights. My medals, including my father's, were aligned with military precision over my heart. My back was straight, my shoulders were squared, my steps were measured and confident as I walked to the prosecution's table. I was not here as Gracie Knight, the broken stepdaughter. I was here as Sergeant Knight of the United States Army, an officer who had sworn an oath to the truth. I felt their eyes on me. I turned my head slightly and saw them. Brian, looking pale and sullen in an ill-fitting suit, sat beside his lawyer. And next to him, Mara. She looked smaller, diminished, her hands clutching a purse in her lap. When she saw me, saw the uniform, her eyes widened with something I couldn't quite decipher. Shock, maybe, or fear. She looked away immediately. My uniform was a statement they couldn't refute. I was not the clumsy, delusional girl they had created. I was a soldier, and this was my field of battle. The trial proceeded with a methodical, almost clinical precision. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Ms. Davies, built her case brick by brick, laying a foundation of indisputable fact. The emergency room doctor was first. He testified about the severe laryngeal trauma, the hypoxia, the deep bruising. He explained, in cold medical terms, how close I had been to death. He confirmed that for 12 seconds my heart had shown no electrical activity. The words, clinically dead, hung in the air. And I saw a few jurors shift uncomfortably in their seats. Then came Jared. He walked to the stand with the steady posture of a Marine, his testimony clear and unwavering. He described hearing the argument escalate, the sickening thud he heard through the wall, and the desperate, guttural sounds that followed. He told them about the code black alert he received on his phone. His voice, filled with a quiet, righteous anger, never wavered. He was the anchor of truth, the outside world confirming that the horrors inside that house were real. And then, Ms. Davies called her next witness. The prosecution calls Mara Miller to the stand. Mara walked to the witness box as if in a trance. Her testimony was a masterpiece of minimization. She painted a picture of a difficult family dynamic, of two siblings who just didn't get along. She described the incident as a terrible argument that got out of hand. She claimed Brian had a temper but would never seriously hurt anyone. She was trying to build a shelter of plausible deniability around her son. Ms. Davies let her finish. Then she walked toward the witness stand, holding a small digital recorder. "Mrs. Miller," she asked, her voice dangerously soft, "do you recall a conversation you had with your son about your late husband's will?" Mara paled. I don't remember any specific conversation." "Perhaps this will refresh your memory," Ms. Davies said. She pressed play. Mara's own voice filled the silent courtroom, tinny and conspiratorial. "Just be patient, honey. A few more days. It'll be over soon. I spoke with the lawyer again last week. Robert's will. It's all taken care of. Everything goes to you. She won't get a dime." A collective gasp went through the room. Mara stared at the recorder as if it were a snake. She began to stammer, to deny, but the damage was done. Her carefully constructed facade of a concerned mother shattered, revealing the cold, calculating greed beneath. She crumpled on the stand, her testimony in ruins, burying her face in her hands. But Ms. Davies wasn't finished. She had saved the secret weapon for last. "Your Honor," she said, addressing the judge. "The prosecution would now like to present Exhibit A, a synchronized audio-video recording of the events on the night of the attack." The courtroom lights dimmed. A large screen descended from the ceiling. For the next few minutes, the entire room was transported back to my living room floor. They saw it all through the grainy, unblinking eye of the nanny cam, perfectly synced with the crystal-clear audio from my phone. They heard the slam of my uniform on the floor. They heard Brian's slurred, venomous words. They heard my cold command, "Pick it up." They heard my voice, calm and steady, revealing the existence of the recording. And then they saw the lunge. The video was brutal, chaotic, but the audio was the true horror. The jury listened in rapt, horrified silence. They heard my choked, desperate gasps for air. They heard the sickening sound of the leather belt tightening. They heard Brian's guttural, animalistic snarls. And then, they heard the words that sealed his fate, whispered with pure malice. "Die in silence, Gracie." The sound of Jared's fist hammering on the door was like a gunshot in the silent courtroom. The video ended. The lights came up. There was no sound, save for the quiet, choked sob of a juror in the back row, a middle-aged woman who was wiping tears from her eyes. The rest of the jury just stared at Brian, their faces masks of cold disgust. They didn't need much time. The jury filed out and returned in just under 2 hours. The foreman, a grim-faced man in his 60s, refused to look at the defendant as he handed the verdict to the bailiff. The judge read the single sheet of paper. "On the charge of attempted murder, we the jury find the defendant, Brian Miller, guilty." The word landed like a hammer blow. The judge proceeded directly to sentencing, citing the overwhelming evidence and the brutal nature of the crime. "Brian Miller, I hereby sentence you to a term of 12 years in state prison." That's when Brian finally broke. He exploded from his chair, a stream of vile curses erupting from his mouth, all directed at me. "You did this! You ruined my life! You bitch!" But I didn't look at him. I didn't give him the satisfaction. As the bailiffs restrained him and dragged him from the courtroom, my eyes found Mara. I looked at her, searching for anything: remorse, sadness, regret. I found nothing. Her eyes were empty, hollowed out, a vacant space where a soul should have been. In that moment, I understood. Justice had been served. But the price was a family that had been irrevocably, completely, and finally shattered. The war was over, but I was standing alone in the ruins. You would think that the moment the judge's gavel fell, the moment justice was served, a wave of elation would wash over me. You would think I'd feel triumphant, victorious. I felt none of that. As I walked out of the courthouse, past the scrum of local news reporters, the only thing I felt was a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The war was over, but the adrenaline had faded, leaving behind nothing but the hollow ache of the battlefield. The army, true to its word, took care of me. I was granted extended leave and checked into a quiet, discreet recovery facility for service members in a peaceful corner of Virginia. It wasn't a hospital, it was a sanctuary. A place for soldiers to heal from wounds that weren't always visible. My days fell into a gentle rhythm of therapy sessions with a brilliant psychologist named Dr. Evans, long walks through the wooded grounds, and hours spent simply sitting in silence, learning how to breathe again without the constant weight of fear on my chest. Dr. Evans was the one who handed me a book. "I think this might speak to you," she said. It was Daring Greatly by Brené Brown. I started reading it that afternoon, and I couldn't put it down. I devoured every page, every word resonating with a truth I had felt but never been able to name. I underlined a sentence that hit me like a physical blow. Vulnerability is not weakness. It's our greatest measure of courage. And I realized, sitting there in the quiet of my room, that my intelligence operation, my collection of evidence, hadn't just been a tactical maneuver. It had been an act of profound vulnerability. I had been forced to look my own trauma in the face, to document it, to own it. I had to dare greatly, to stand in the arena and present my brokenness as evidence, not of my weakness, but of his crime. The thought didn't heal me overnight, but it planted a seed of a new kind of strength, one that wasn't about enduring pain, but about embracing the courage it took to expose it. About a month into my stay, a letter arrived. The envelope was addressed in Mara's familiar, looping handwriting. For 2 full days, I just looked at it, sitting on my nightstand. It felt like a ghost from a past I was trying so hard to escape. Finally, with Dr. Evans's encouragement, I opened it. The letter was 5 pages long, a rambling, self-pitying monologue. It was filled with excuses disguised as apologies. She wrote about how scared she'd been, how Brian had always been a difficult child, how she was so afraid of being alone after my father died. She never once took full responsibility for her choice to stand by and watch me die. The letter ended with a question that made my stomach turn. "Can we please find a way to start over? I miss my family." I read it once. Then I read it again. The old Gracie would have felt a surge of rage. The younger Gracie would have felt a flicker of pity. But the Gracie sitting in that room felt neither. All I felt was a deep, quiet, and profound sadness. A grief for the mother I never had, and the family she was still trying to pretend we were. I mourned the loss of an idea, a dream of what could have been. I spent the next week thinking about my response. I knew I had to write back, not for her, but for me. I needed to draw the final line in the sand. I sat down with a pen and a single sheet of nice stationery. My hands were steady. "Mara," I wrote, "I have read your letter. I believe that on some level, you are sorry for what happened. But forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. Forgiveness does not require me to forget, nor does it require me to re-enter a situation that nearly cost me my life. So, yes, I forgive you. I forgive you for my own sake, so that I no longer have to carry the weight of your choices. I wish you peace. But our paths must now go their separate ways. This is not an act of hatred. It is an act of self-preservation. This is my boundary." I signed my name, folded the letter, and sealed the envelope. As I dropped it into the mailbox, I didn't feel anger or even sadness anymore. I felt clean. I felt a quiet strength that came from choosing my own well-being, finally. A week before I was scheduled to leave the facility, I got a call from the lawyer the Army had assigned to me. He informed me that, as part of the legal proceedings, the house in Ohio was being put up for auction to settle the estate. A wave of panic washed over me. That house held so many ghosts, so much pain. But it was also the last physical piece of my father I had left. The thought of strangers living within those walls, erasing the last traces of him, was unbearable. And then, an idea took root. A wild, audacious, terrifying idea. I'd received a significant sum from a victims' compensation fund, and with the support of a grant from a veterans assistance program, it was just enough. "Wait," I said to the lawyer, my heart pounding with a new, fierce energy. "Don't sell it. Is there a way I can buy it?" The lawyer was silent for a moment, surprised. Then he said, "It's unorthodox, Sergeant, but it's possible." The decision was made in an instant. It was a choice born not of fear, but of defiance. I would not run from the ghosts of my past. I would not let Brian and Mara be the final chapter in that house's story. I would go back. I would face the memories, the pain, the very floorboards where I almost died. I would not just reclaim a piece of property. I would reclaim my history. And I would rebuild my fortress from the ashes. A year has passed. Time, I've learned, doesn't heal all wounds. But it does give you the space to learn how to live with the scars. And in that time, I have been rebuilding. The house, my father's house, is unrecognizable. The dark, oppressive walls that held so many secrets are now painted a warm, bright white. Sunlight streams through new, larger windows, chasing the last of the shadows from the corners. The contractors wanted to replace the oak floors in the living room, to sand away all the history and the hurt. I told them no. I let them polish the wood until it shone like honey, but I had them leave a few of the deeper, faded scratches near the fireplace. They are reminders, not of the pain, but of what can be survived. The house needed a new name, a new purpose. It's no longer just a home, it's a foundation. I call it Fort Grace. Fort, for the strength and safety it now represents, and grace, for the unearned kindness we must learn to give ourselves in order to heal. It's now a transitional home, a registered nonprofit providing temporary sanctuary and support for female service members dealing with trauma. The irony is not lost on me. The living room, the very spot on the floor where I drew my last breath, has become the heart of it all. This afternoon I'm sitting there, on a comfortable new sofa, a mug of chamomile tea warming my hands. Across from me sits a young woman, a Marine Lance Corporal no older than 22. She's been staring at her own hands, twisting a loose thread on her jeans for the last 10 minutes. This is her third day at Fort Grace, and she has barely spoken a word. I don't push. I just wait. The silence in this room is no longer a weapon. It is a shield. It is a space to gather your thoughts. Finally, she looks up, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. "He told me," she whispers, her voice cracking, "that no one would ever believe me. That I was overreacting. That I was broken." My heart doesn't break for her. It holds steady. Because a broken heart can't help anyone. A steady one can. I put my mug down and lean forward, making sure she can see the absolute sincerity in my eyes. I don't offer advice. I don't give her platitudes or tell her she's strong. I give her the one thing I know she needs. The one thing I almost died for lack of. "I believe you," I say, my voice soft but firm. "You are not overreacting, and you are not broken. You are safe here, and you are not alone." The dam breaks. She begins to sob, not loud, violent cries, but the quiet, exhausted tears of someone who has been holding on for too long. And as I sit with her, simply bearing witness to her pain, I feel a final piece of my own fractured soul click into place. In validating her reality, I am healing my own. In offering her a sanctuary, I am completing the construction of mine. This is the circle of healing. This is what it's all for. My story, after the trial, had unexpected ripples. With the backing of Colonel Ford and the evidence from my case, a formal review was initiated within the Army's command structure. It led to a small but significant policy change, the implementation of the FBT protocol I had been a beneficiary of, creating a clearer, more supportive pathway for service members to report domestic threats without fear of it jeopardizing their careers. It gave my pain a purpose beyond my own survival. I was medically discharged from the Army a few months ago, an honorable discharge for wounds received not on a foreign battlefield, but in my own home. Now I have a new mission. I travel to bases across the country, speaking to soldiers about the invisible wars many of them are fighting. I share my story, not as a tragedy, but as a testament to the power of evidence and the courage of speaking up. I turned my personal war into a public service. The sun is beginning to set now. The young Marine is resting peacefully in one of the upstairs bedrooms. My old room, now a bright, safe space. I walk out into the backyard, the same yard where I met Jared a lifetime ago. He's still next door, a constant quiet presence, always ready with a cup of lemonade and a knowing nod. The Ohio sky is on fire, painted in brilliant streaks of orange, pink, and purple. I stand there, breathing in the cool evening air, and my hand drifts up, my fingers unconsciously tracing the faint, silvery line on my neck. The scar doesn't ache anymore. It doesn't burn with the memory of betrayal. It's just a part of me now. A map of where I've been, a testament to the battle I fought. It is not a mark of weakness. It is the emblem of a soldier who won the most important war of her life. The last rays of sunlight wash over me, warm and golden. And for the first time in what feels like a lifetime, standing on the ground I reclaimed in the fortress I built from the ashes, I feel completely and utterly at peace. My journey to this peaceful sunset wasn't about erasing the past, but about building a future from its ruins. My story is proof that even the deepest scars can become maps that lead us home to ourselves. I know many of you listening have walked through your own fires and found your own kind of strength. If my story has touched you in any way, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. We share these stories to build a community of survivors. For today's comment, I'd be honored if you would share one word that represents your own resilience. Thank you for listening.